Today, you will be learning about the longest period in human history, called the Paleolithic Era. Lithic means the nature of or relating to stone. Pale often refers to old, right? So the old Stone Age. Most historians can agree that the Paleolithic Era started 2.5 million years ago, and it did not end until about 10,000 years ago. So definitely the longest period in human history. Start discussing the characteristics and the people that lived in the Paleolithic era, I would like you to understand two very important terms. The first term is prehistory. Pre meaning before, history, which means to historians the era of time before humans were writing. So without writing, humans were unable to create complex cities. They did not have centralized governments, and they did not have complex tools. Right? So history officially refers to the time period in the past where humans learned how to write. Right? So with the emergence of writing about 5,000 years ago, a historian would officially call that history. So prehistory is the time period before history, so before the time when humans were writing, right? The question then becomes, how in the world do we understand the era of prehistory? How do you learn about somebody's past if you have no written records? So it's easier today if I want to talk about, a president. I can go to his memoirs and hopefully one day her memoirs. But when we're talking about the people of the Paleolithic era, we have nothing to turn to where they can say, this is what we were thinking, this is what our religion is about, this is our leader. So in the 1800s, a new science emerges known as archaeology, and it's this new science that helps historians start understanding the past. So 200 years ago, archaeology is created, and it's created by scholars to help people understand and study the cultures that lived in the era known as prehistory. And archaeologists are able to do this by analyzing and locating human remains, fossils, and artifacts. Remember, artifacts means anything made by humans. So archaeology is crucially important because it has changed the way we look at history, how we gather information about history, and our perspectives of history. And I'll give you two quick examples. The first example is that there are archaeological digs happening right now in South America that are pre-Columbian archaeological findings. So what do I mean by that? They are pre-Columbian, before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. And in these archaeological digs, they are finding burial sites that have jewelry in them. And they're looking at this jewelry, they're analyzing the jewelry, and they're realizing that these are glass beads that they could only have gotten from West Africa. So history is starting to be changed that maybe West Africans and indigenous cultures of South America had been trading with each other before Christopher Columbus, right? Completely different view of history than what anybody's ever learned about before, right? Well, here in Orange County, we have a very important archaeological dig happening, and that's happening at Montpelier, right? Now, 20 years ago, when you went to Montpelier, you would have only heard the stories about James Madison's, home. You may have learned about his wife. You'd have learned about who visited that home, like General Lafayette or Thomas Jefferson. And historians were able to piece this information together because they read personal correspondence between Dolly Madison and Thomas Jefferson, or correspondence between people who visited the house while Dolly Madison was there, and they were talking about Dolly and what she was wearing, and who was at her dinner parties. All right, but nowadays, archaeological diggings are focusing on a group of people who have been left out of this story. And that group of people are slave communities. Slave communities, often did not leave written records behind because it was illegal, all right? And so by studying archaeological digs of slave cemeteries or trash sites where slaves would have dumped a bunch of trash, out of the Madisons, we were able to understand more information about who people really are and what cultures were really like and what society was really like through archaeology because people just didn't write about it. Archaeology is the key. It is the science that has allowed historians to start understanding the Paleolithic era, all right, or the Old Stone Age. All right, remember, lithic means and refers to stone, all right? Well, here's what historians have been able to understand about these first Homo sapiens through the use of archaeology. One, through the use of archaeology, the oldest human remains are in East Africa. So most historians are going to agree that all humans, all Homo sapiens, emerged in East Africa. They actually believe that Homo sapiens emerged in a place called the Rift Valley in East Africa. And the question to you that I want you to take 5 seconds to ponder and to just kind of write one thing down in your notes is why East Africa, right? Why would the first Homo sapiens on Earth emerge in East Africa? Why not South America? Why not North America? Why not someplace in Asia or Europe, right? So I want you to I'm going to take a few seconds and you just write something down. Okay, so other characteristics that we learned about the first Homo sapiens. Well, one, historians have referred to them as hunter-gatherers, and you can imagine that they referred to them as hunter-gatherers because they were either hunting or they were gathering items like food, all right, or sticks for their survival, right? We do know that hunter-gatherers were nomadic and that they followed migration routes of animals because they were always in search of food, shelter, and water. So, this is something that myself, I couldn't understand, having to wake up and going, okay, where's our shelter going to be today? Where's our food going to be today? How are we going to get water, the bare necessities to live? Because when I come home and I knock off of work, I'm go to the same shelter that I've always go to, my home. I always have water. We have so much water in Orange County that we even have water fountains just as decorations. People don't even drink from them. And food, when I want food, I either go to the local farmer's market or go to Trader Joe's. So this is something where people are going to be completely shaped by their physical environment. All right. Just as a side note, you should know that a lot of historians argue that because hunter-gatherers' needs were so small, they actually worked far less than we do today, and they had a lot more leisure time than the average American does today, and they were able to form stronger family bonds because of it. All right. All right, take a moment to use the map to analyze the migration routes of hunter-gatherers. Right? Around 100 to 400,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, who had emerged in East Africa, started to migrate to other continents in the world. This map shows you that around 60,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers followed the migration route of going to Eurasia first. And most scholars would agree that hunter-gatherers who left Africa started by going to Eurasia. Right? Now, from Eurasia, they either went to Asia or to Europe, and then to Australia, and then the last two continents for hunter-gatherers to migrate to was North and South America. Right? What you should know, though, is 10,000 years ago, before humans had permanent settlements and before they learned how to farm, there were 8 million people who lived on Earth. And all 8 million people who lived on Earth were hunter-gatherers. Right? By 1500 AD, a third of the world still were hunter-gatherers. And most of the hunter-gatherer societies were concentrated in North and South America and Australia. All right, there were still hunter-gatherer societies who lived in Asia and Africa by the 1500s. What I also want you to understand is the intellect that hunter-gatherer societies had, because they were able to survive their physical environment and actually learn to overcome their physical environment. And the best analogy or examples I can give you is a TV show that I saw this summer for the first time ever, called Naked and Afraid. It's on Discovery Channel, and what happens is the Discovery Channel takes two survivalists, two people who study survival techniques. Most of the gentlemen on there are ex-military, and most of the girls are survivalist teachers, and they throw them in to various areas where hunter-gatherers would have lived. Like this picture you see in front of you of this man and this woman who had to survive Tanzania, which is one of the areas where some of the first humans emerged from. And what you see is that, these two people really struggle to survive for 21 days. Most of them, lose like 30 to 50 pounds of weight within those 21 days. Because they are having a hard time overcoming their physical environment and find food. While hunters and gatherers were able to do that and populate so much that they were able to migrate to other places. I mean, if you ever get a chance to watch Naked and Afraid, and you should be, when you watch it, you will be afraid too, right? You'll get to see, how people, react when they're trying to overcome their environment, and actually how intelligent the first hunter-gatherers were, because modern people like myself could not go back in time and survive in those type of conditions. Right? I also threw in a clip here for people that like to watch, disgusting things that people on Naked and Afraid had to eat in order to survive. Now, where to stay is a hugely important decision for hunter-gatherer society, because if you think about it, 100,000 years ago, hunters and gatherers were not at the top of the food chain. They were towards the bottom. A 2-year-old child would have been an easy prey for a leopard at night if left unattended, or a human with a broken arm or leg. I know you've watched National Geographic, so I know you see what animals like a lion or a lioness turn to when they're looking for food. They turn to the weakest link. So where to stay, huge deal. All right, very important for hunter-gatherer society. Some hunter-gatherer societies turn to tent-like structures like this one. Other places for hunter-gatherers to stay, of course, was caves. I mean, it would be a place where humans could take over for a few weeks, or a month. And they wouldn't have to worry about erecting a shelter. Now, what do hunter-gatherers have to worry about? Well, hunter-gatherers would have to worry about where the entire band, would stay. And when I say band, I'm talking about a group of 30 to 50 hunter-gatherers who all live together in kind of like a clan. The great thing about hunter-gatherers staying in caves is that they left evidence of their time in that cave, and we would refer to those as cave paintings or cave art, as some people refer to. Now, as archaeologists analyze cave paintings, they're going to date it by using carbon dating to figure out when the cave painting was created, when hunter-gatherers would have been living in that region, and they would use it to try to analyze what type of animals were out there. And most historians agree that cave paintings weren't a way for hunter-gatherers to have some type of writing, but it was a way for hunter-gatherers to have some type of communication, either with other hunter-gatherers or with other family members and clan members, to let them know about migration route and maybe what they're hunting. Hunter-gatherer societies started overcoming their environments by creating technology. I'm not talking about computers here, but anything that a human uses that will help them adapt or overcome to their environment is referred to as technology. And some of the first technology that humans ever created were very basic. They were made out of things like stone, animal bone, trees. And so these items, of course, are going to be used for hunting food. All right. The first would be, as you see in the picture here, a spear. Later on, bows and arrows. Fish nets were made, but knives were made. But what these things all had in common is that even though they may have made a knife out of a bone of some animal or stone from someplace, they were all unpolished. They were not sharpened, and that doesn't happen for hundreds of thousands of years. Hunter-gatherer societies live without polishing and polishing these tools. Another interesting piece of technology that they created that I want to point out is fire. It's become very apparent to historians that humans began cooking their food much earlier than we had recently thought. Some historians even argue that it was a million years ago people were cooking their food. That's a pretty controversial statement, and that's still under study. So nobody really knows when fire was created. Nobody knows how fire was created. Most historians believe that maybe there was a lightning strike, and then people were able to collect fire from a natural fire that was happening in a forest or something, and then later on learning how to make it on their own. But what we do know about fire is that fire does two very important things for humans. First, it allows them to keep animals away at night, right? So people are going to be able to survive. Animals are afraid of fire, and it helps them surviving by having a fire on at night. The second thing that allows them to do is it allows humans to cook their food. It allows them to kill, bacteria, and then, therefore not getting infections and living longer. All right. The third big piece of technology that humans were able to create, these early hunter-gatherer societies were able to create, is the oral language. Learning how to speak and how to communicate with each other is crucially important, and it is crucial being able to talk with each other to create a social life, to create customs and culture, to understand, who we are or what we're thinking, or what we want to do. So, I don't know which of these pieces of technology is the most important, but I'm sure tomorrow several of you will come in with an argument of which one, and I want you to pick one. Which piece of technology between the fire, the spear, and the oral language is the most important, and why? Okay, I just want to take a moment to compare the different types of hunter-gatherer hunting tools, for a second. Now, hunter-gatherer tools are those three tools that you see on the top left of your screen. All right, they are ones just made from what hunter-gatherers could find. Maybe they took a rock and broke it, or maybe they found the rock like that. Right. The ones on the bottom right are not found until the Neolithic era, until the time period when humans started becoming settled, when they started learning how to farm. And as you can see at the bottom right, those are the ones that are polished. They have those, sharper tips, jagged edges, where, it looks like they could actually do some damage to an animal. I just can't imagine being a hunter in hunter-gatherer society and having to hunt with those three objects that you see on the top left. I mean, what are you going to do? Like, you'd have to creep up on something and bang its head. I mean, even if you had a bow and arrow, which they did in hunter-gatherer societies, it wasn't going to be polished. So, I mean, imagine the deer. You see a beautiful, buck in front of you. You take your bow and arrow. You go to hit the deer, but that deer is just going to look at you and laugh because that thing's going to bounce right off. To me, it's really important for you to kind of get an understanding and view of the tools and how hunter-gatherers were still able to survive by using, those things on the top left there. What's very interesting to me is that from the beginning of hunter-gatherer society, from the beginning of Homo sapiens emerging in East Africa, there was a clear line and division of labor based on your gender. All right, males are going to be the hunters and females are going to be the gatherers. And my question to you is why? Why is that the case? I mean, most societies today clearly divide labor by gender. And it's something that becomes cultural and that people follow. But so why? Let's just not talk about today's gender divisions. Let's talk about the gender divisions of the past. Why was labor divided by gender in hunter-gatherer society? And I know one answer always comes out. People always yell it out, no matter if they're male or female, but they always say because men are more athletic, they are stronger, and that's why they should be the hunters. Well, I'm going to tell you that wasn't true for hunter-gatherer societies, and most women today would probably tell you that that's not true. But in hunter-gatherer societies, you're talking about people that were barely 5 feet tall, if that, and men and women were the exact same height and weighed the same. And so there wasn't a clear difference between, who was more, physically taller or faster. But the answer is that men were expendable. Women did the gathering, and they gave their societies, their clans, 90% of their diet. 90% of the diet came from women gathering things like berries, nuts, and fruits every day. All right, while men brought back 10% of the diet because most of the times they failed at it. I mean, if you're going to go hunting and you're using unpolished tools, I hate to tell you, bud, but you're probably not bringing much back home. Another thing too is that we talked about this earlier. Humans were at the bottom of the food chain here, and so as you see in that picture on the right, they're going up against a bear. They may be stabbing the bear, but it may not even be penetrating the bear's body yet. And so the bear's just getting ticked off, and as you see in that picture, he's about to kill one of their hunters. And so that's why historians believe that gender roles started to divide their labor, because men were expendable. Women were not. Women took care of the children, besides gathering food, and in order to have your clan live on, and you wanted to have 4 or 5 children, then you probably wanted 4 or 5 different women to stay in that clan. While men, in actuality, if you wanted to have 4 or 5 different children, you really just needed one man. So most historians agreed that gender roles were divided from the very beginning because men were the expendable ones. There's one thing too that's very clear in hunter-gatherer society, is that you had to be very quick intellectually. You had to know what to do very quickly to overcome your environment, just in case things went wrong. The women had to know what foods to eat, what foods not to eat, what berries to eat, what berries not to eat, and sometimes you figured that out by trial and error. But there would be definitely an oral history that you would definitely teach the younger generations so they could expand on their knowledge. The men too, you had to have, if they were going to be hunters, they had to be, they wanted to be the fastest ones out there. If they broke a leg or they broke an ankle, they were going to be a prey to some other larger animal out there that was more than willing to eat them for the night. And here's one example is, think about it as a gatherer. You've climbed a tree, you're trying to pick an apple or some other type of fruit, and all of a sudden you got a boa constrictor, wrapping itself around you. Well, what do? You got a boa constrictor wrapping itself around you. You don't want to scream, because if you scream, well, then that boa constrictor is going to contract and it's going to squeeze you even more. And every breath you take, its muscles squeeze in and in and in an effort to try to suffocate you. And so, that would be something where you would want to quickly cut off its tail, because that's how boa constrictors are able to balance themselves. And without their tails, they're unable to kill their prey. And we're talking about boa constrictors that are not the ones that you find in pet stores, but the ones that you can find in East Africa that are, that can be 8 to 10 feet long. So being quick, being extremely intelligent is something that hunter-gatherer societies had to develop, that they had to evolve with, or they weren't going to make it through the day. Now, just because I said that there were divisions among genders on what labor they took, whether you were a hunter, whether you're a gatherer, did not mean that, men or women were more powerful than the other, all right? In hunter-gatherer societies, actually, everyone is equal. Paleolithic era is the only era in human history where there was a classless society. All right, there were no kings, there was no leader who emerged to be the dominant voice of the group. And everybody was respected equally within the group. Everybody had certain roles and certain tasks that they had to perform, and that was very important to the group. They had no real leaders. And so all men, all women, all old people, all young people were all treated equally with respect, and they all had equal amounts of power within the group. One thing that archaeology has also been able to prove about hunter-gatherer society is the role of religion. Religion has always been a part of Homo sapiens' existence. Religion is very important to people, as it is today. Religion is crucial to many people's lives. And the reason why they know that hunter-gatherers had some type of ritual and some type of ceremonies is because of the manner in which they were buried. Most hunter-gatherers would be buried with things like flowers or prized possessions. Things like if you were, a hunter, you were buried with your bag and with your tools. I mean, that would be something that people would believe that you would be able to carry on in your afterlife. And we know that humans still do that today. When we bury our loved ones, we bury them with items that our loved ones, enjoyed in their life. Whether we bury them in, their favorite outfit, or we give them, their iPod with their favorite music on there. We usually give them some type of object that we believe that they will use on in the next life. And the same case is in hunter-gatherer societies. As you look at these pictures, you should be pretty scared. I understand completely the fear that you have while looking at these pictures. And before I explain these pictures, I want you to understand that hunter-gatherer society, at least the first hunter-gatherer societies, believed that the gods or their deities were actually the natural elements. All right, so what do I mean by that? What I mean is this, is that rain was an actual deity. All right, sun was an actual god. Wind was an actual god. All right, it wasn't some god controlling those forces, but it was those natural elements themselves as gods. And the reason why historians believe this is because hunter-gatherers were still being shaped by their environment. All right, everything that happened, if there was a flood or there was a drought, would be because of one of the natural elements, and therefore because one of the gods. All right, now what do you see in front of you? Well, what do you see in front of you is the idea that hunter-gatherers were polytheistic. All right, they believed in polytheism. They had more than one god that they prayed to. And throughout human history, there's a long part in human history where many civilizations, not just hunter-gatherer societies and Neolithic time periods, but even the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks believed that there was more than one god that was controlling what was happening here on Earth. All right, but their favorite god in hunter-gatherer societies was the mother goddess. All right, now she was the mother goddess. All right, she was huge, very chunky. All right, she had breasts that oftentimes was portrayed as going down to her knees. And she was portrayed as being old. And the question for you is why? Why did hunter-gatherer societies worship these mother goddess? Why were these mother goddess in hunter-gatherer societies, whether they're living in Africa or whether in North America or Asia, why do they all have some type of mother goddess as being one of the head gods in their religion? All right. And the answer is, look at how this mother goddess is portrayed. Why would you want a mother goddess to be fat? Well, because that means she's been eating. And she hasn't been eating little like hunter-gatherers probably were. She was probably eating an awful lot because she had plenty of it, plenty of food. All right? Well, why do you want her to have, breasts that hang to her knees? Well, because that is a sign of her fertility, is what they're showing. That she survived childbirth numerous times and have given society numerous children. And that's very important, because the number one killer of women up until World War II is childbirth. All right? Childbirth has killed millions of women throughout history. All right? So she survived childbirth numerous times, not just once. All right? Another thing, why is she old? Well, being old is very important. That means you're living, you're surviving. The average age of a hunter-gatherer's death was around their early 20s. Hunter-gatherers were not living, through their 30s. They didn't get to live to 80 years old. They were lucky if they got to be 40 years old. They were really old then. All right? And so religion is crucial into understanding hunter-gatherer society and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out what these hunter-gatherer societies and cultures were like. There are still hunter-gatherers living in the world today. There are very famous hunter-gatherer societies that live in South Africa. They live in the Philippines. They live in South America. So you can definitely Google some modern-day hunter-gatherer societies. What we still know about hunter-gatherer societies today is that they still work far less than we do. They have way more leisure time. The average hunter-gatherer society today works 12 to 19 hours per week. Young people are not expected to work in hunter-gatherer society until they're in their 20s. And people over the age of 40 are not expected to work. They spend most of their leisure time eating and drinking and playing and socializing. Another fun fact about hunter-gatherer societies is that they have lower blood pressure than people living in industrialized nations. And their blood pressure does not go up the older they get. They have very low cholesterol levels in comparison to people living in what we would call modern societies. They don't have obesity. They don't have hypertension. They don't have diabetes. You rarely find somebody with diabetes living in a hunter-gatherer society. They are way more physically fit than Westerners today. They rarely ever have a heart attack or heart failure. They rarely ever have an incident of cancer. And most nutritionists state that this is because they have a very low fat intake, a lower use of tobacco and alcohol use, and they have a greater amount of fresh and natural fruits and vegetables that they're eating than agricultural societies or industrial societies who spray chemicals on their food. We also know that hunter-gatherer societies are a lot more peaceful than modern day societies. They don't have crime like stealing because they have so few possessions. Do they have people killing each other? Yes, it happens. There are moments of anger, but it's very few. They don't have the weapons or access to the weapons like somebody in a modern day society would. We also know that hunter-gatherers want to stay hunter-gatherers, and that's why hunter-gatherers today have been doing it for thousands of years, and that hunter-gatherers of the past have rarely moved to modern living societies willingly. They actually were forced to do it by some imperialistic power or some very aggressive agricultural society or industrial society beside them that had taken away their land. Or force them to do it. Right? So hunter-gatherers are still part of our world today. And so feel free to Google one for extra credit and bring me in some fun facts. Thanks.